Well, greetings from the shores of Casco Bay. Decided to go live with this spicy subject. It always seems to be a topic of hot conversation these fine days. I want to say what I'm up to here. I'm not going to be talking about individuals, and I'm not necessarily going to be talking about individual sports, except insofar as sports generally have taken an approach within the International Olympic Committee's framework on fairness, inclusion, and non-discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sex variations. I'm going to be talking mostly about what the IOC and what the international and national federations of various sports have taken as their approach to the issue of including trans women specifically, and specifically at the elite level. Not going to be really talking too much. I might mention participation at the scholastic level. But let me get started just by reading. I mean, I wish I had a fancy computer and whatnot, but all I've got is this iPad Pro. I wish I could put stuff up on the screen, but I can't. So let me just start by reading from the IOC Framework on Fairness, Inclusion, and Non-Discrimination that was released in November of 2021. A little bit of background here. In 2004, from 2004 until 2021, the International Olympic Committee, which is the governing body for all Olympic sports, set down some ground rules for transgender people in participation in Olympic sports. And between World Athletics, which handles track and field, and the IOC, the two bodies set up the ground rules for participation based on testosterone levels in blood. The IOC had a limit of 10 nanomoles per liter. World Athletics had a limit of 5 nanomoles per liter. And they started including trans people in 2004. It's usually not, when we talk about these issues, it's usually never about the guys. It's always about the trans women. Understandably so, I think, because there's a lot of assumptions as regards capacity for women to compete against men. But even in that framing, you're basically saying that trans women are men. And that's not the way the IOC or World Athletics at the time really wanted to view this thing, because I believe it's point 3 of the IOC charter declares that sport is a human right. And so, as the issue developed, the IOC decided that the best thing to do for itself and for world federations in athletics would be to let each federation make its own decisions on the basis of this framework that I'm going to read. And I'm being told my audio is clipping a bit. Let me see if I can fix that. Hold on. Bear with me. All right. Is that any better at all? Glossius 789. Somebody in chat, let me know. May just be my voice. I don't know. Okay. Thank you, Pragmatic. Appreciate that. So anyway, I'm going to start reading this. And there are links in the description to everything I'm going to refer to during this stream. Every person has the right to practice sport without discrimination and in a way that respects their health, safety, and dignity. At the same time, the credibility of competitive sport, and particularly high-level organized sporting competitions, relies on a level playing field where no athlete has an unfair and disproportionate advantage over the rest. Through this framework on fairness, inclusion, and non-discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sex variations, the IOC seeks to provide a safe and welcoming environment for everyone, consistent with the principles enshrined in the Olympic Charter. The framework also acknowledges the central role that eligibility criteria play in ensuring fairness, particularly in high-level organized sport in the women's category. This framework is issued as part of the IOC's commitment to respecting human rights, as expressed in the Olympic Agenda 2020+5, and as part of the action taken to foster gender equality and inclusion. In issuing this framework, the IOC recognizes that it must be in the remit of each sport and its governing body to determine how an athlete may be at a disproportionate advantage against their peers, taking into consideration the nature of each sport. The IOC is therefore not in a position to issue regulations that define eligibility criteria for every sport, discipline, or event across the very different national jurisdictions and sports systems. Therefore, the aim of this framework is to offer sporting bodies, particularly those in charge of organizing elite-level competition, a principled approach to develop their criteria that are applicable to their sport. Sports bodies will also need to consider particular ethical, social, cultural, and legal aspects that may be relevant in their context. This framework was developed following extensive consultation with athletes and stakeholders concerned. This included members of the athlete community, international federations, and other sports organizations, as well as human rights, legal, and medical experts. It replaces and updates previous IOC statements on this matter, including the 2015 consensus statement. This framework recognizes both the need to ensure that everyone, irrespective of their gender identity or sex variations, can practice a sport in a safe, harassment-free environment that recognizes and respects their needs and identities, and in the interest of everyone, particularly athletes at elite level, to participate in fair competitions where no participant has an unfair and disproportionate advantage over the rest. Lastly, the IOC recognizes that most high-level organized sports competitions are staged with men's and women's categories competing separately. In this context, the principles contained herein aim to ensure that competition in each of these categories is fair and safe, and that athletes are not excluded solely on the basis of their transgender identity or sex variations. Where eligibility criteria must be set to regulate the participation in the women's and men's categories, the establishment and implementation of such criteria should be carried out as part of a comprehensive approach grounded on the respect for internationally recognized human rights, robust evidence, and athlete consultation. In so doing, precaution should be used to avoid causing harm to the health and well-being of athletes. It goes on to say, to articulate several principles. First, inclusion. Everyone, regardless of their gender identity expression and/or sex variation, should be able to participate in sports safely and without prejudice. Measures should be put in place with a view to making sporting environments and facilities welcoming to people of all gender identities. Sports organizations should work together to advance inclusion and prevent discrimination based on gender identity and/or sex variations through training, capacity building, and campaigns that are informed by affected stakeholders. Mechanisms to prevent harassment and abuse in sports should be further developed by taking into account the particular needs and vulnerabilities of transgender people and people with sex variations. Where sports choose to establish eligibility criteria in order to determine the participation conditions for men's and women's categories for specific contests in high-level organized sports organizations, these criteria should be established and applied in a manner that respects the principles included in this framework. Individuals or parties responsible for issuing such criteria should be appropriately trained in order to ensure that these issues are handled in a manner consistent with these principles. The design, implementation, and evaluation of these measures and mechanisms should be done in consultation with a cross-section of affected athletes. Now, I know this is long-winded and very official, but this is the IOC. This is the governing body for Olympic sporting events worldwide, which covers everything. It covers the gamut from skiing to sailing, which is my sport, by the by. And I think the reason I'm reading this and the reason I'm trying to bring this to people's attention is that I have so often heard, well, this is all new. Nobody's ever thought of this before. And that's just not the case. The IOC, as I said before, has allowed for trans participation in sports since 2004. And I'll mention that since transgender athletes, both men and women, have been permitted to compete for a slot on a nation's Olympic team or on a national team or at this level of competition, there have been exactly 2 trans individuals who have made a national team, and 1, Laurel Hubbard, who's made it to the Olympics, made it to Olympic competition since 2004, nearly 20 years. Chris Mosier was made the U.S. national team as in track and field. He's a guy. So when it comes to scoreboard, at least at the elite Olympic level, we've had 20 years of non-domination in sports by trans women. I often say that trans people are never a problem until they win something. Anyway, that's just my own editorialization. In any case, principle 2, prevention of harm. This is key. It's very important for athletes. We don't want to kill ourselves out there in unfair competition. It'd be bad. The physical, psychological, and mental well-being of athletes should be prioritized when establishing eligibility criteria. Sports organizations should identify and prevent negative direct and indirect impacts on athletes' health and well-being that may come from the design, implementation, and/or interpretation of eligibility criteria. Principle 3, non-discrimination. Eligibility criteria should be established and implemented fairly and in a manner that does not systematically exclude athletes from competition based upon their gender identity, physical appearance, and/or sex variations. Provided they meet eligibility criteria that are consistent with Principle 4, athletes should be allowed to compete in the category that best aligns with their self-determined gender identity. Criteria to determine disproportionate competitive advantage may at times require testing of an athlete's performance and physical capacity. However, no athlete should be subject to targeted testing because of or aimed at determining their sex, gender identity, and/or sex variations. Principle 4. This is a good one. It's called fairness. Where sports organizations elect to issue eligibility criteria for men's and women's categories for a given competition, they should do so with a view to A, providing confidence that no athlete within a category has an unfair and disproportionate competitive advantage, namely an advantage gained by altering one's body or one that disproportionately exceeds other advantages that exist at elite level competition, in other words, training, etc., and so forth. B, preventing a risk to the physical safety of other athletes, and C, preventing athletes from claiming a gender identity different from the one consistently and persistently used, with a view to entering a competition in a given category. In other words, you don't let somebody in claiming to be somebody they're not simply to win a pickle dish. Principle 5 is really important. No presumption of advantage. No athlete should be precluded from competing or excluded from competition on the exclusive ground of an unverified, alleged, or perceived unfair competitive advantage due to their sex variations, physical appearance, and/or transgender status. 5.2, until evidence per Principle 6 determines otherwise, athletes should not be deemed to have an unfair or disproportionate competitive advantage due to their sex variations, physical appearance, and/or transgender status. Principle 6, evidence-based approach. Any restrictions arising from eligibility criteria should be based on robust and peer-reviewed research that demonstrates a consistent, unfair, disproportionate competitive advantage in performance and/or an unpreventable risk to the physical safety of other athletes. B, is largely based on data collected from a demographic group that is consistent in gender and athletic engagement with the group that the eligibility criteria aim to regulate. And C, demonstrates that such disproportionate competitive advantage and/or unpreventable risk exists for the specific sport, discipline, and event that the eligibility criteria aim to regulate. 6.2, should eligibility criteria prevent an athlete from entering a given competition, each athlete should A, be allowed to participate in other disciplines and events for which they are eligible in the same gender category, and B, be able to contest the ultimate decision of international federations or other sports organizations through an appropriate internal mediation mechanism, such as ombudsperson and/or procedures before the Court of Arbitration for Sport, to seek remedy. The last principles are primacy of health and bodily autonomy, a stakeholder-centered approach, and a right to privacy. And finally, periodic reviews. So international federations have been working since November of 2021 to implement eligibility criteria in their various sports. I've been involved in U.S. Sailing's approach to this matter. We've been working hard, and it's a very thorny issue. I really appreciate it. Really is a thorny issue and difficult. But very recently, in fact, last November, the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport released a very comprehensive literature review of medical, biological, and social investigations, peer-reviewed literature on the issue that covered every publication from 2011 to 2021 inclusive, both years. It's available on the web. There are links in the description to follow up on that. And the results of that study are quite interesting. There's a lot we don't know. There's been a lot of work done, but there's a lot we don't know. And the cover page of this pretty much sums up what they did, what the study was all about, and their approach to it. Now, CCES is basically Canada's anti-doping body. They are funded by they're part of the World Anti-Doping Association. They're the people that say, hey, you're monkeying around with stuff in the wrong way and you're cheating, basically. So naturally they take an interest in this subject, but they also want to be sure that they are approaching this within the ISE framework, which is to say peer-reviewed evidence, not newspaper stories, not scare tactics, not junk. So they commissioned, in 2021, the CCS commissioned E-Alliance to complete a review of scientific and gray literature on transgender athlete participation in competitive sport. The report, Transgender Women Athletes in Elite Sport, is a review of research articles published in the English language between 2011 and 2021 inclusive. The report is divided in two sections, one that encompasses biomedical studies and a second that encompasses sociocultural studies. The report's authors recommend that all reasonable efforts should be made to make sport inclusive and accessible for transgender individuals. However, the scope of this review was limited to binary trans women who are elite athletes and was not sport-specific. As a result, the conclusions are not directly applicable to other trans or non-binary populations and other levels of sport. Literature reviews is one component of a larger scope of work that aims to support leaders and policymakers and provide access to critical research and insights. Key findings. Biological data are severely limited and often methodologically flawed. First bullet point. Second bullet point, there is limited evidence regarding the impact of testosterone suppression through, for example, gender-affirming hormone therapy or surgical gonad removal on transgender women athletes' performance. Available evidence indicates trans women who have undergone testosterone suppression have no clear biological advantages over cis women in elite sport. Key sociocultural findings: biomedical studies are overvalued in sports policies in comparison to social science studies. Policies that impact trans women's participation in elite sport are the continuation of a long history of exclusion of women from competitive sport, an exclusion that resulted in the introduction of a women's category in sport in the first place. Many trans inclusion sports policies use arbitrary bounds that are not evidence-based. Cissexism, transphobia, transmisogyny, and overlapping systems of oppression need to be recognized and addressed for trans women to participate in elite sport. So that's the CES stuff, and I'll talk to the executive summary of the report. So, key biomedical findings. And this is a study of well over 40 papers between 2011 and 2021. And not all of them agree. I mean, I included in on the description two medical people studying in the field who vehemently disagree with these conclusions and made their opinions well voiced, made sure that they voiced their opinions strongly. And I included them because I don't want it, I don't want it to be a complete echo chamber. I mean, I know that people will come back on, maybe refer to this thing and say, oh, she's out of her mind. She just doesn't want to hear anything. No, I hear it all. I do hear it all. And I want to hear it all. But again, it's one of these situations where you're getting the preponderance of the science, the preponderance of the research seems to indicate, while we don't have all the answers and all the studies are flawed, we are not at the beginning of the exploration of what it means. And in the meanwhile, the participation of trans people in all facets of society are under close scrutiny and examination. And when you start excluding us from one area of society, it's a sign that the doorway to understanding and acceptance is barred. So anyway, key biomedical findings. Most studies, biological data are severely limited and often methodologically flawed. Most studies do not adequately adjust for factors such as height or lean body mass. Almost no studies examining the effects of testosterone suppression on trans women do so among trained athletes. Most studies on the effect of testosterone on sport performance involved examination of individuals who use performance-enhancing drugs. There's limited evidence regarding the impact of testosterone suppression through, for example, GAHT, gender-affirming hormone therapy, or surgical gonad removal on transgender women athletes' performance. Most of these studies had small sample sizes, imperfect measurement techniques, poor reference group comparisons, and studied a sedentary/non-athletic untrained sample population. Some significant studies used misleading data sources and actively ignored contradictory evidence. Available evidence indicates trans women who have undergone testosterone suppression have no clear biological advantages over cis women in elite sport. Bullet point: the higher level of red blood cell count experienced by cis men is removed within the first 4 months of testosterone suppression. Bullet point 2, there's no basis for athletic advantage conferred by bone size or density other than the advantages achieved through height. Elite athletes tend to have higher than average height across genders, and above average height is not currently classified as an athletic advantage requiring regulation. On average, trans women who are pre-testosterone suppression still have lower mean body mass, LBM, cross-section area, CSA, and strength than cis males. This indicates that the performance benefit experienced by these individuals cannot be generalized by examining cis male athletes. There are a lot of studies comparing trans women to cis men. There are a lot of studies comparing men to women. There aren't a lot of studies comparing trans women to cis women. There are some, not many. When adjusting for height and fat mass, LBM, CSA, and strength after 12 months of testosterone suppression, trans women still retain statistically higher levels than sedentary cis women. However, this difference is well within the normal distribution of LBM, CSA, and strength for cis women. LBM, CSA, and strength loss continues for trans women after the 12-month initial testosterone suppression. The limited available evidence examining the effect of testosterone suppression as it directly affects trans women's athletic performance showed no athletic advantage exists over 1 year of testosterone suppression. Several citations there. Post-gonad removal, many trans women experience testosterone levels far below that of premenopausal cis women. I can personally attest to that. Key sociocultural findings. Biomedical studies are overvalued in sports policies in comparison to social sciences studies. The literature on trans sports policies, their implementation, people who write them and apply them, consequences for athletes, and the debates they frame is constitutive of the social hierarchy of knowledge within which some sciences are discredited to the benefit of others. Excluding certain types of knowledge from the restricted definition of scientific makes it possible for sport governing bodies to obscure the power relations at play in the creation, maintenance, and legitimization of regulations. There are troubling links between some researchers, sport organizations, and third organizations with anti-trans agendas. Some sport organizations use science strategically, drawing solely and uncritically on data which appears to support their claims. Only certain biomedical factors are policed under a mandate of fairness in elite sport, despite strong evidence that financial material resources, such as access to infrastructure and equipment, nutrition, time to train, higher salaries, are associated with advantage in sport. And that right there is certainly the case when comparing men's sport and women's sport across the board. You can see that in every discipline, in almost every category. My sport of sailing is actually very lucky. First of all, there's a very few opportunities for professionalism in sailing. I've been fortunate enough to have some of those opportunities, as have several of my cis female friends. And the sport of sailing is, I'll just speak to this a bit. The sport of sailing is remarkably co-ed. There really is no significant advantage. As a matter of fact, we did do a study of collegiate sailors pre-pandemic. We collected the results, looking at scoreboard. How's scoreboard go in IC, what's ISSSA or ICSA? I'm sorry, collegiate sailing in the United States. And we discovered that there was no advantage to having a guy on the boat. It was like the women's teams and men's teams. They compete almost exclusively coeducationally, and there are some teams that are two women, some teams that it's a guy and a girl. It's a mishmash, but there's no advantage to having a guy on a boat, whether the female is driving or male's driving. It just doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, women tended to do a little bit better than men when it comes to results, looking at results nationwide over the course of 3 years, which is cool. It's great. But here's the thing. How many women go on to sail and stay involved in the sport competitively? Why? Why not? A lot don't, because of the culture. A lot of people don't, just because of the culture in the sport, even though their ability is all there, 100%. Better, in fact. Every opportunity. But they don't get that opportunity. Why? Sociological reasons. Just a thing. Anyway, I don't know, as I'll let you all have a look at this study. It was released just last November. And I get into these, I get irked sometimes and get into these arguments with people on the YouTubes or people on the Twitter or here and there and what may have you. I just want to point out that there are better sources of information than Fox News or MSNBC or the New York Times. There are actually people studying this stuff, and actually people in sports organizations. It's not as if we haven't been thinking about this for years. I mean, the criteria prior to 2024 at the Olympic level were somewhat more stringent. I mean, surgery was required for trans participation, one way or another. And in 2024 was the introduction of the testosterone limits, and it's been an ongoing discussion. I mean, I started transitioning in 1998, and I had to have my blood work if I wanted to compete. It's quite invasive, actually, but we won't get into that. That's rather stupid. But in sailing, it really wasn't a problem. I just didn't want to be questioned for the most part. But when I hear time after time that on any given day, any given guy is going to beat any given woman in an athletic competition, it frosts me. It frosts me as a woman, it frosts me as a feminist. It's like, it's a flashback to my younger days of Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King. It's just a sexist attitude that, no, you're not. Sorry, Bobby, you're not going to beat Billie Jean. Sorry, somebody in the street, you're not going to beat Serena Williams. It's just not. It's not going to happen. Maybe the best men's player in the world could take her out, but I bet she'd give him a run for his money. There are so many of these issues where people are drilled into their own prejudice, and they just don't want to get out of it. It won't make any difference what the, whatever the argument might be. So anyway, I just, having been accosted with, well, not so much accosted, but having made these arguments over and over again in various chat rooms and stuff, I just felt like maybe if I went on here and just threw those links up there, if anybody comes across this thing, or if anybody wants to talk to me about it, it's like, I'm happy to do it. It's just, I wish people would spend the time to really look into what's going on. And again, it's just sort of the it's one of the consequences of letting trans people into sporting competitions is they might win. That's a risk somehow. But let me tell you, when was the last time you went out on the football field, or went out on the baseball diamond, or went out on the race course, or went out to engage in any sort of athletic competition with the intention to lose? And it seems like the expectation is that if you're trans, you should not expect to win. And if you do win, you should expect to be vilified because you have an inherent advantage. Even though apparently you clearly don't understand the immense disadvantages and the immense impediments that are already in our way. There aren't that many people, trans people, who want to get involved in sport to their detriment and to the sport's detriment because of people just not wanting them there. And it's a hard thing to be a human who's not wanted in any field, in any place. So I hope you give that some consideration and look at the science, not Tucker Carlson going, ooh, ick. Ben Shapiro, ooh, ick. Stephen Woodford, ooh, ick. Yeah, I'll call them out. Because I don't think they've done the research. I don't think they've done the work, and I don't think they've talked to people. I might be wrong. Anyway, that's what I got. So thanks all for coming. Thanks for listening. If you listening to me stumble over my words. I guess I'll see you around the YouTubes here and there. Good night.